Okay, here comes another debunk that's coming out over this fake black Egyptian type thing. Here we have what I believe to be a West African descendant, and again trying to claim Egypt, and she wants to try to use logic. It fails her, but let's look into it.
There's just no way that we can sit here and actually believe that somehow magically the first original indigenous people of Egypt were not black. Of course they were black. What else could they have been?
Well, they could have been Caucasians, like the Caucasians that surround them there. All of North Africa was Caucasians, East Africa, just outside the border and around from there, and their culture attaches and linguistics to North Africa and Eurasia rather than some African dialect, and it sure doesn't attach to any Negroid dialect. But worse than that, everybody tries to target the very first dynasty of Egypt, but it goes back way before that, and the Nakada and Badarian cultures that had been living there before. And archaeologists and many scientists have gone through the trouble of figuring out, yeah, they were all ancient Caucasians too, and some of these are attached to ancient hunter-gatherers, and other ones are to the Natufians and the Levant and so on. And yeah, and they're Caucasians. They're all Caucasians. Yet there was one report in the Nakada one that they had found some people with curlier, frizzier hair. Not Negroid hair at all, but curlier, frizzier hair. And by that, they inferred on the very first form whether or not these people, not all of them, but just these two here, might have some Negroid influx into them. Of course, later genetics was checked and says, no, not at all. But blacks don't want to have that part of it. They want to have the part where there might have been some admix. So they're left with only maybe have some admix, and it's not sub-Saharan, it's Nilotic, which is not even the same. And West African primitives didn't even know if Egypt existed, and they're not in the Bible either. But they like to say things like this. Let's continue.
Most of the people who are living in Cairo and Alexandria, in much of Lower Egypt, which is northern Egypt, yeah, they're not what we would typically consider black or black African. However, in
not what we would typically, and she looks around and everything. No, they're Caucasians. They have a little bit of Negroid admix from the slave trade, but these are Islamics and Arabic people, and that's not the people that were in ancient Egypt. In fact, they've done the recent genetic test study, and they say the current population has about a 1% match with it. But they also showed that it had no Negroid admix in the ancient Egyptians, almost not enough to even speak about. But lo and behold, where does Negroid admix show up? Does it even show in the 25th dynasty? No. It shows up well after the Roman period, and that shows that it only came in with admix and other people that had come from that time. And why desperately try to say that West African primitives were not West African primitives? Oh, I guess it's out of an inferiority complex, but one thing's for sure, the ancient Egyptians were Caucasians.
Upper Egypt, Southern Egypt, everyone is black, everyone is African. The culture there is...
No, it's not. I can show you pictures of Sudan and everything that goes on. And yes, while in Sudan, which is not Egypt, what we're talking about, in Sudan, they have a lighter group of people, which are definitely Caucasian and some admix, and then all of a sudden there are these Nilotic blacks. And you can easily tell the difference. Don't act like you can't. But that's not what was there in ancient times. I'll give you an example. So we're talking about ancient American Indians and how they had lived everywhere, and there was these Seminoles that lived all over Florida. So we went driving all over Florida, and I didn't see any Seminoles, so I'm leading to believe that there were a bunch of Cubans in America, and America was founded by Cubans. No, you can't get that logic to your head. How about the logic that they had no blacks? Nubians weren't even allowed into Egypt. They showed up after the very few dynasties and got their ass all killed off as Nubian A colony and didn't show up again for 400 years as Nubian C colony, and Nubians weren't even allowed into Egypt by decree. Simne Stele of Senuseret III will show that to you clearly, is one of many, but they weren't even allowed in or past Icon. That's way up there in Meroe, in that type of area, and up in Nubia, so because they built that up there and they had that as being a government for it. And still they claim that, but they won't ever look in the pyramids and see all the pale people on the walls, because they were subjugated under Egypt and worshipped their gods and stuff. Just kind of like the black Americans that live in America today are worshiping the god of the Jewish slave master that enslaved them and brought them to Americas. Although many now have taken to blaspheming and saying that God is a Negro somehow, and that the Bible was all about them and all this stuff. And of course, we're in the exact 400th year of them being in America, and they said a black space god was going to come down and put Whitey in chains, and they were going to burn Whitey alive, and all kinds of crazy things they said in my videos. But it hadn't happened yet, and it's not going to happen. It's just going to go on as that pathetic lie. And then that exposes what black people would like to do in their mentality. And that's even more disgusting. Let's continue.
Black African culture. And before you jump on me again, I just want to say that I lived in Egypt for 2.5 years, and I made a lot of Egyptian friends, and a lot of them are black.
That's incredible. That's incredible. But that doesn't mean what the ancient Egyptians were. So don't jump on me again, then you have some illogic disconnect. I went to Egypt, I saw black people, yes. Yeah, a lot of times they're still called Nubians today. I can show you videos where tourists are there, Caucasians and stuff, and they point at black people and call them Nubians. Or they call them Nahasu. To this day, Coptics call them Nahasu. It actually secretly means worthless. But they weren't Negroids.
Yes, a lot of them are black. Let me show you.
So she really thinks she has something, because in the video she's wearing a Caucasian mimicking hair hat of fake hair that's long. I don't know if this is her real hair right now, but it looks like it's sloped back and she's lost her edges, and that is a Caucasian mimicking hair hat she's wearing now. But these children that she's talking about are Nubians, and there's no reason to ever show that, for Nubians are never going to be called Egyptians, and that's a fact. So she sits there going, I can't figure this out. My IQ's low, and I covet, I want to have some other history. Can I just lie about this? Which they didn't know it existed.
Right. Okay. Now, I mean, I don't understand how people can sit here and say that Egyptians are not black, right?
Do you understand how someone could say that West African primitives didn't know Egypt existed and played no part in it, and therefore if they were to claim it, it would look pitiful and pathetic, disgusting, and actually racist? And then whenever you know for a fact that they are Caucasians and that it had nothing to do with Negroids, and really definitely nothing to do with West African primitives, then it's a disgusting racist ploy, and it's not even worth talking about. But Negroes won't shut up. It's always been known that there were forms of Caucasians that were there, but they want to act like they don't know. Sadly, they try to use those pictures, but the pictures show red ochre males and pale females, and I'll be damned if the Greeks, the Mitanni, the Minoans, and the Etruscans, and all the people around in that area didn't use those exact same colors. And you wouldn't say a Greek was a Negro. Oh, Negroes try. They try to say they were anything but West African primitives. I've seen Vikings, Shakespeare, English nobility, all kinds of things. What I haven't seen is West African primitives. Isn't that odd?
So the people that you just saw, the little children, little black children playing with the camel, and my friend, they are Nubian. And a lot of people will sit here and say like, oh, Nubians. aren't really Egyptian. Well, actually, sir and ma'am, Nubians are the only people in Egypt today who still speak a pharaonic language, meaning they still speak a language that was spoken by the pharaohs themselves. No
Negro knows the truth, apparently. And then she wants to put this picture up here about Queen Ty. I'll get to that. The Negroes in that area, some have adopted the language of the people speaking in that area. There are some that have even adopted Coptic, I believe, too, which is closest to the ancient English or Egyptian dialect. But Nubians and the Negroids that were in that area did not speak Afro-Asiatic languages in any way, shape, or form. They spoke Nilotic languages, and they still speak Nilotic languages today. It is not a pharaonic language in any way, and she's lying again. But worse than that, they show this slightly photoshopped picture, and they photoshopped it so bad they have to make the background white on the picture, or you could tell it was over-contrasted. But this is a yew-wood statue of Ty. And they've always said that this is an afro, and look, she looks like a pissed off black woman. Well, secretly be known, whenever you look at her actual mummy, she's got this long auburn hair, and it's non-Negroid hair whatsoever. And of course, her offsprings are all non-Negroid, and her parents are all non-Negroid. And they even have blonde hair and stuff, and people are like, what? And, oh, the natron caused that and everything. Okay, well, they tried to make that happen to hair with natron. It doesn't do anything to it. By the way, it doesn't matter if it changes the color. It doesn't change it from Negroid hair. This requires permanence and things like that. And even if you put a perm in a Negro hair and do all kinds of things to it, they can still look under a microscope and go, yeah, this has been unkinked out Negro hair. So really it's a mute point. But then yew wood is as light as pine, and so this picture would have been light as pine at one time. But even worse than condemning than that afro is actually just a silver veiled doily over her head, and she's wearing a little pharaoh hat that has points up here and points up here. And they did a CT scan on it, and I've got it in 10 videos where it shows that's CAT scanned, and when it's CAT scanned, you can see the pharaoh hat. It's up under it. And hell no, that isn't an afro. You can even see the grid pattern on it, but they just want, oh, so desperately for that to be an afro. And no, again, the Egyptians said the Nubians spoke a language that was like gibberish, and they were more difficult to domesticate than Thoth's monkeys that he talked about. And they make a bunch of bad statements about them, and you don't want to go there. And those are the only Negroids around at the time. Yeah, so it's not going to be ever what you are trying to portray. But let's continue.
Other group of people in Egypt still has preserved an ancient aspect of their culture, like the language. Everybody else in Egypt speaks Arabic.
You be blinking a lot whenever you're talking, because that's a lie. The Coptic people don't speak Arabic, but you don't know that. You don't know much. What you do know is you want to claim Egypt, and that's pathetic.
Arabs do not come from Egypt originally, and that's one thing I wanted to get back to. So if you didn't know, the Nile starts in Uganda, which is a country in
Central Eastern Egypt, and there's a picture of it.
Oh, Africa, Central Eastern Africa, and everybody in Uganda is black. Right? There are many Nile basin countries. Uganda is one. Ethiopia is another. Then there's Tanzania.
You know, Ethiopia is up to 50% Caucasian admixed, and the area of Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa was always Caucasians way back in the day. It's called Ethiopia now, but it used to be called Abyssinia, and people try to misuse this idea of the Greeks made up a name called Ethiopians, which means sunburned faces, but Blackstone gets sunburnt, and that ends that idea. But they desperately want to, because they say it said he had black skin and curly hair in the Ethiopians, and no, it didn't. It said that they had darker skin and curly hair. Tan people have darker skin and curly hair. If you look up Ethiopia of the Greeks, just in Wiki, it'll show you a old map of Herodotus' map during that time that they're talking about, and it shows sub-Saharan Africa doesn't exist. They don't know that it exists. And they have all these brown blotches all over the place at the end of river valleys, and that, of course, is farmers. And now we seem to be talking about rednecks. Let's continue.
Then there's Sudan, which is South Sudan. Sudan and South Sudan. And Sudan and South Sudan are known for having some of the darkest people, the darkest, blackest Africans in the whole continent.
Yep. And roll your eyes and everything while you talk. And yeah, they're almost tar black there. And definitely you could never say that that was the Egyptians' color, art, phenotype too. This prognostic jaw that black people have, you know, that sticks out more. And Caucasians don't have it from being hunter-gatherers for so much longer than they were and everything. They're saying that's one big trait that brings into it. And you look at the artwork of all of the Egyptians, and they're all non-prognostic, and they're all a lighter color, her color or less. And don't know if it shows up today or not, but I myself am close to her color, but not near the red tone that she has. I'm more cardboard colored, but that doesn't mean anything. Of course, the black people in America are bleaching themselves and trying to get as light as possible, and the light blacks in America don't like the dark blacks in America and things, but that doesn't mean anything about the ancient Egyptians. For the blacks in America, on preponderance of the West African slave trade, never knew Egypt existed, but she keeps trying.
Right. Another point I wanted to make is, well, connecting to this point about the Nile starting in Uganda, the first people to come from Egypt came from the Nile. And since the Nile
hooks up to the Mediterranean, and there's Caucasians all around the Mediterranean and all North Africa and stuff, all they had to do was just follow it up much less farther than any sub-Saharan would have to do and cross a desert. But she tries.
Starts in Uganda, not some mystical place in Asia. It's logical to connect the dots and say, oh, well, the first people had to come from this place in Africa where plenty of black people originate from.
No, it would be real easy to figure out that over time, people didn't even know where the Nile originated from, not even the Negroids of the area. Even whenever they went into the area where it did originate from, they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. If you want to verify that, you can look up Dr. Livingston, I presume. Right? Stanley and all this. And it definitely goes with it, for they were trying to find the source of the Nile, and blacks right today would not know what the source of the Nile was if it wasn't for Caucasian schools, book, and learning, and the knowledge that they've accrued. Blacks haven't accrued this knowledge. They're learning off of white people the knowledge of the Nile and then trying to use it against them and lie. And if that's not disgusting enough, yeah, it is. It is.
like, why is this so hard for so many people to, like, come to grips with? Like,
why is it so hard for West African primitives to come to grips with they were not part of Egypt and didn't know it existed, no matter what people they're, green, blue, ever, anything? Nor the biblical people, which are all Caucasians. There isn't some seeking Negro that pops out anywhere. And if there was just one, like they try to profess, of Hamites, which if you look it up says Hamites is a division of the Caucasian race, well, who would that marry if it was one secret black Negro that was cursed? Yeah, you would make a mulatto and then a quadroon and go from there. Where do you get all these black people from? They're not mentioned. Just as much as Eskimos aren't mentioned in the Bible, or the Oriental people, or Amerindians, Negroes aren't mentioned in the Bible. It's not your book. It's about the Caucasian religion, and Sumeria, and all the things that happened through there and all the way into Egypt. And that has nothing to do with Negroids.
I mean, Egypt, at the end of the day, Egypt is in Africa. Egypt is an African country. And yes, there are many people in Egypt that are not of African descent, because Egypt was colonized for thousands of years by a lot of different types of people.
They want to try to push that narrative. And in fact, the reality is Egypt is now, latter point, been colonized by Arabics with their slave trade and their admix that comes with that. And a bunch of black people have showed up since, trying to mooch off the society. Much like the Nubians, where they wouldn't go away and try to make their own because of incapability, and so they just tried to stay and mooch at the border. Much like in South Africa, where they didn't build any of that beautiful white country that's there, but they stayed at the border long enough, and somebody thought it was a great idea to give it back to them. Now, I don't agree in apartheid as much, but it was a way of protecting the people from what exactly is happening today. Why couldn't those black people go anywhere, 100 miles that way, and build something of their own? And it's from capability. These people would rather mooch and steal something, and then after the fact, like, even try to say that they built it. It is disgusting, but let's continue.
Egypt was colonized by the Romans. It was colonized by the French. It was colonized by Arabs. It was colonized by Turkish.
Now let's go with it straightforward. Egypt was two different colonies before it was ever dynastic Egypt and what people are calling Egypt, and those weren't ethnically different from each other either. They were slightly different cultures. Slightly. But they were both Caucasians, and that came together into that. Now, the only known invasion or she likes that colonization. Ooh, want that Wakanda colonization. The only known colonization first one was Hyksos. And the Hyksos are definite Caucasians, but they brought the horses and the chariots to there, along with compound bows and many things, and some of their philosophies and things. And that really stretched the tenure of the Egyptians there. But the Hyksos were there, and then they got all expelled out. And the Egyptians didn't necessarily breed with them. They didn't go whole hog with it and stuff. And so people have tried to say, oh, what you're seeing is Hyksos. And if you look at the disdain for they had them whenever they ran them out and didn't want them there, then just like the Nubians, then you would realize that that's actually an impossibility. But they want that possibility there, but then they don't want the impossibility of West African primitives possibly being in Egypt to be seen as impossible in any way. Isn't that strange? How you can take that little scale of knowledge and wisdom and put it up there and it just won't work. But they want so desperately for it to work. Well, after those Hyksos, it was apparently the Persians, and then it would have been the Akkadians, and then Greeks, and then Romans. And oh yeah, I got to leave it out. The 25th dynasty, there was a 70 year period, or a 92, depending on which deal you go by, that the Cushites took over Egypt during a weak point, and they were using Nubians as part of their army. And it only lasted that short period of time, but Egypt really never recovered after that point, and shortly after became under other rulers as a vassal, and slowly went away, and then turned into what it is today, a shadow of its former self by far. But that doesn't have anything to do with West African primitives or Negroids in any way, except for they helped to cause the downfall of what they're trying to claim they started and they didn't.
By the Turkish, by the Ottomans. And so as a result, today, Egypt is a very mixed country.
It's very mixed because blacks have come in now, and they were actually allowed to finally, even though the Simna Stele and many others say that they weren't going to be allowed forever, and they weren't allowed to go down the river Nile forever. They weren't allowed through Egypt. They sure weren't lollygagging around off into Libya. Oh, well, by the way, the whole of Africa was really considered Libya back then, if you look at it. They didn't name it Africa. A white man named it Africa after a white man, but that's another story that gets lied about too sometimes out of jealousy and an inferiority complex.
Racially, ethnically, it's very mixed, and you can see that in the people.
Now,
but at the end of the day, the first people from Egypt came from Africa because Egypt is in Africa.
And yeah, North African Caucasians, and it looks like there was an influx from Anatolians and North European farmers. And so, yeah, up there in the north, European farmers and Anatolian farmers coming down, and the separation between them. What were those? Those were both Caucasians too. Where are the black people at? They didn't exist in it. It's not there. Didn't happen. Oh, well, they were one of them. No, they weren't. It's just like saying, okay, well, which tribe in the Bible was black people? And it's like, you can't get black people magically out of white. Just like blacks try to say, oh, we can make albinos, so whites is just albino Negroes. And it's like, God, please stop.
wants to jump in and say, well, Sinai, what about Sinai? That's not in Africa. Okay.
You know, it's the saddest thing that she tries to pull off here towards the end of it, where she says, well, it's in Africa, so it has to be Negroes. And that's never going to work for them either, because all of North Africa was always Caucasians, all the way through to the Horn of Africa. If you wiki the actual definition of Caucasian race, it'll actually explain it right there to it. But what about the Sinai Peninsula? What about Sinai? What about Sinai? That has nothing to do with it necessarily. I don't, know why she's trying to go off on it, but I guess it's just a ploy to try to get some attitude out there.
Let me tell you something about the Sinai Peninsula.
Tell me.
The Sinai Peninsula, first of all, it's contested whether that's Asia or Africa or not, number one. Number two...
No, it's not. No, it's not contested on whether it's Africa or Asia, not in any way, shape, or form by no one, unless you want to be a Negroid trying to claim things that aren't part of yours. So that's disgusting. Number 17 in the video. Let's go.
Egypt hasn't always owned Sinai. Sinai was controlled and owned by Israel at one point. Sinai was controlled and owned by Saudi Arabia at one point. So...
And no, way before that, it was owned by a lot of different people too. The Canaanites that were there and so on. And so, yeah, but was any of those Negroids? No, none of them. None of them were Negroids. Definitely not.
All of that aside, mainland Egypt is in Africa, so by default, the original people of Egypt are Black Africans.
Yeah, that's the most stupid statement that she said so far, and tried to do it again now. See, that was that thing where 3 times she tried to lead there, and then here she goes, badoom. And blacks might get this from being gullible, but no one else will, because all of North Africa, look at her sorrow looking at me like, come on, believe my lie. Yeah, all of North Africa was always Caucasians. Egypt was Caucasians. Blacks didn't have anything to do with it. And West African primitives didn't know it existed and aren't part of the Bible either. And it's sad that this keeps going on even after it's been proven over and over and over again. And they still try to keep coming with this. Well, it was in Africa, and it's, yeah, that was named after Caucasians from the endemic Caucasian North Africans. No, that's exactly it. It's not going to change. History won't change just because you magically want it to so bad. It's not going to. In fact, all this showing of so bad just shows you how pathetic it is.
And it's kind of obvious because, like I said, the only people in Egypt who still speak an ancient pharaonic language that came from the ancient Egyptians, that came from the ancient pharaohs, are Black. They are.
That's not true. In fact, that's a desperate lie. They speak Nilotic languages, and some of them have adopted Afro-Asiatic languages, but that's not it either. They don't speak ancient Egyptian anymore either, really there. Like you would see somebody in a church speaking Latin or something, You don't really see it go on there. People aren't harkening to that. And the Arabs pretty much drew that out of them. The only people there that really speak the older language or something close to it, and a derivative directly of it, are the Coptics. And they're all Caucasians, although there is some admix in them. Whoopsie. That doesn't make Negroids part of Egypt either, and this is all so pathetic.
Not the light-skinned Turkish people that you see. They're not the Arabs. They're not the descendants of Europeans living in Egypt. They are Black Africans. So please feel free to leave comments. I welcome trolls. I welcome...
Yeah, you welcome trolls. Well, you ought to probably get some trolls, but you say you're welcoming trolls, but I looked through your comments down there, and you've thrown everybody's comment out that would tell you you're a liar, and kept every comment that Black started hopping up and down and telling us that the white man's been lying to him. It's disgusting. Just as disgusting as all the other videos that say this same disgusting lie, where West African primitives try to interject themselves into civilizations they didn't even know existed.
All types of people wanting to chime in, but...
Yep. Subscribe, guys. Click that button below too, so you'll get your notification. I've noticed if you subscribe and don't click that button, you don't get notified for months. We had somebody who was watching everyone constantly off of it miss 3 weeks worth of one, saw one, and then realized she had missed very many weeks. So if you already are subbed, I appreciate it. And we'll continue from here and go on and talk about more of those Caucasian Egyptians and biblical people and the heralds of mankind.